All right, fifth graders, welcome to Friday afternoon. We're going to do one more video with comparing fractions and talking about denominators before we move into our operations with fractions next week. This video is going to be talking about comparing fractions to determine if one is larger than the other or they are equal. Now, we talked about one way to do this with finding least common denominator. In this video, we're going to talk about 4 different ways to do this. So if you'll write this down in your Cornell Notebook, and then we'll get ready to start. Okay, so comparing fractions. You always want to know, how can you tell which fraction is larger? There are a couple ways to do this. There are 4 ways that you can do, and there's probably more than 4, but we are going to focus on 4. And the 4 we are going to look at, if I can get this last one to show up, is cross multiplication, pictures, common denominators, and decimals. When we looked at the different strategies people used to put the fractions in order, we had people using common denominators, pictures, and decimals. Cross multiplication will be a new one that we'll cover. So we are going to start with common denominators. When you're using common denominators, it's exactly what we talked about. You can do quick common denominator, or you can do making your list of least common multiples to find it. So first of all, you have your 2 fractions. You need to decide on a denominator that both fractions can share. And you want to then move each fraction into an equivalent fraction with a denominator chosen in number 1 using scale factors. So in this case, we used least common multiple, and we found out a common denominator is 40. And if you look at it, that also would be the quick common denominator, because you just multiplied the denominators by each other. All right, so in order to compare it, we would have 5 times 8 is 40. 4 times 8 is 32, so our equivalent fraction is 32/40ths. Over here, we're multiplying by 5, top and the bottom. And if you notice, they did 8 on the bottom and 8 on the top. We have 25/40ths, and we can then say that 32/40ths is larger than 25/40ths. One thing when you are doing the comparison is you need to go back to your original work and write your comparative sign there, because that is what the original question was. They want to know 4/5 compared to 5/8. You found it using equivalent fractions, but you need to note it on your original problem. So that's using least common multiple, quick common denominator. We've done that a couple times, so let's move on. I want you to do these 2 problems. They're also going to be the same 2 problems that you will find in the Moodle quiz. So do these in your Cornell Notebook, and then when you get to the quiz, you'll be able to answer them quickly. All right, this time we are going to look at cross multiplication. Cross multiplication is another strategy to use for this. Cross multiplication is exactly how it sounds. You multiply across the fraction. The key is you multiply diagonally. You multiply the denominator on the left by the numerator on the right, and then you multiply the denominator on the right by the numerator on the left. The product that is the largest is the largest fraction. So let's look at an example. So if we're comparing 3/5 and 7/8, we're going to take the denominator on the left, which is 5. We are going to multiply it by the numerator on the right, which is 7, and our product is 35. The next step is you take the denominator on the right, you multiply it by the numerator on the left, and our product is 30. And we can see the products. The product on the right, 35 is larger than 30, therefore 7/10 is larger than 3/5. This is called cross multiplication, and it's another way to determine which fraction is larger. Once again, do these 2 problems using cross multiplication, and these will be the 2 problems you will find in your quiz at the end of this lesson. So go ahead and do these in your Cornell Notebook. All right, the third way we're going to do it is with pictures, so we can tell which fractions are larger using pictures. Comparing fractions using pictures is exactly how it sounds. You draw pictures to represent the fraction, and the one that takes up the most space is larger. The key is, there's a couple points you need to be very, very careful about. This one is super important. Right here. You must be sure to use the exact same shape for the whole. If you are comparing two fractions to see which one shades more, you can't have one of the wholes being larger or smaller than the other one because you won't be able to compare them. You must be sure to divide it into sections as carefully as possible. If you don't, you really won't be able to tell which one takes up more or less space. So this one takes some accuracy with drawing. So if you have very good accuracy with drawing, this would be a good one for you. All right, so we're going to compare here 3/8 and 3/4. We start by drawing two equally sized fraction bars, and we talked about why they need to be equal. If one was bigger, when we shade it, we are not going to be able to do a comparison. So let's take the first bar. We're going to divide it into the number of pieces in the denominator, which is 8. So here you can say we divided it into 8 spots. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we've divided out our first fraction. We need to shade the indicated numbers on the top. So we will shade 3 of them. That's 3/8. All right. Now we repeat this process for 2 and 3 for the second fraction. We use the exact same size bar. We divided it into fourths. And once again, we're going to shade 3 of it. All right? And you can see by comparing this one with this one takes up more shaded space than this one. So we can safely say 3/4 is larger than 3/8. And there are some fractions that this works better with, but this is also another strategy you can try. On this one, we have 6/11 and 4/7, 1/3 and 2/9. Once again, these two questions will be on your quiz. Solve them in your Cornell Notes book, and you will answer them at the end on the quiz. And we're only going to do one set. And this is one other additional one to this. These are two other problems. Do you agree with the answers to these problems? Why or why not? So, on 1/6 is greater than 1/4. Do you agree that that is correct based on the pictures or not? Why or why not? And 2/3 equaling 4/6. Do you agree with that? Why or why not? So those are two of your questions that will be on the quiz. So figure those out, write those down in your Cornell Notes book, and we'll go on to our last strategy. The last strategy is decimals, and when we did comparing fractions, there were about 2 or 3 people that used decimals. Comparing fractions using, it should be decimals, is just how it sounds. You rename each fraction into a decimal and look to see which decimal is bigger. The key is, you must remember, it is numerator divided by denominator. The numerator goes in the house. The denominator goes outside the house. If you get a quotient that is not a decimal or that is not smaller than 1, you did it wrong. Go back and flip your numerator and denominator. All right, converting fractions to decimals. You start with your fraction. In this case, we have 11/15. So step 1. Step 2, you divide the numerator by the denominator. And you can do this on a calculator. You could do it by hand. Anyway, when you divide the numerator by the denominator, you get 0.7333. Therefore, 11/15 equals 7 33 hundredths. That goes on forever. So that is the really quick comparing or changing fractions to decimals. Why don't you go ahead and give this a try on your own, just to make sure you are strong on that one. All right, to compare fractions using conversion to decimals. You convert each fraction to a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. So, our first one, 3/5. We have our numerator and our denominator, and you would divide those out. 7/10. You have your numerator and denominator. And this one you can tell just by the words 7/10 that it would be 7. Divide those out. And you will see that this one is 0.6 and 0.7. Look at the two decimals. See which one is larger. You then know 7/10 is larger than 3/5. Okay? Once again, these two problems, converting them into decimals, they will be on the quiz following this lesson. Solve these two, and then if you need to go back and review any of them, you can start taking the quiz. I'm going to use these results to be able to tell where we need to start on Monday. On Monday, I'd like to start with adding and subtracting fractions and move into multiplication quickly. So go through these, and I'll be able to tell based on your results. Have a good weekend.